You're listening to the Glenn Beck Program.
Senator Ted Cruz, who has just issued the third report, the Senate Judiciary Subcommittee on the Constitution, Civil Rights, and Human Rights, the third report on the assault on state rights and expanding of federal power by this administration. And I want you to know that Senator Cruz is not somebody who's just got into the Senate and is now standing up and is changing his position. This guy has been there for a very, very long time, just not in Washington. And even I didn't realize and connect the dots. He's been doing this for a long time.
Yeah, one of the main things that I remember Ted from was, because I was in Texas at the time, was Ted was the Texas Solicitor General when Texas went to the Supreme Court to argue the Jose Medellin case. He was the illegal alien who brutally raped and murdered two teenage girls. You can't even tell the story. It's so awful.
Ted, I have to tell you, I was standing backstage with Marcus Luttrell. We were doing a show. Remember, it was a Common Sense tour. We did the show. Right. And the governor came. Marcus Luttrell was there, and we were standing backstage. And I said, what is going to happen in that case? You are not going to obey the World Court and this administration, are you? And this is when Bush was president. Yeah. And he said, oh, no, that's not going to stand. And he said, believe me, he said, I will not stand down. And he said, we have the best Solicitor General in the United States on the case, so don't worry about it.
Yeah, and because the president, who was Bush at the time, sided with Mexico in the World Court. And then,
so what's the difference between that and what this president is doing?
Well, look, that was exceeding his power. And in that instance, Texas stood up against the President of the United States.
And there was a stay on his execution. There was a stay. Right. Mexico was trying to get a stay on the execution of Jose Medellin, who had 20 years before, it was almost 20 years, murdered these two teenage girls.
It was a horrible crime. He had confessed to it. And what happened is Mexico had sued the United States before the World Court, and the World Court had issued an order that tried to order the U.S. justice system to reopen the convictions of 51 murderers across the country. It's the first time in the history of our nation that a foreign court has tried to bind the U.S. justice system. And then, unfortunately, the president compounded the problem by issuing effectively an executive order that attempted to order the state courts to obey that World Court decision. And Texas, look, it was an unusual situation for Texas to stand up and fight the President of the United States, particularly when he was the former governor of our state and a Republican. And yet I was very proud of my boss, Texas Attorney General Greg Abbott, because he said, let's go and do the right thing. And on behalf of Texas, I went before the Supreme Court and argued, number one, the World Court and United Nations have no jurisdiction, no authority to bind our justice system. And number two, the President of the United States has no authority under the Constitution to give away U.S. sovereignty and to make our justice system subject to the World Court. And the U.S. Supreme Court agreed with Texas across the board, struck down the World Court order and struck down the President's order and upheld our sovereignty.
All right. By the way, just a programming note, Greg Abbott is going to be here in studio with us on hour number 3 because now the gentleman Ted was just talking about is running for governor of Texas. And we wanted to have a chat with him, and so he's going to be coming in here in just about an hour and 15 minutes or so.
Terrific. He's a very good man.
So, Senator, you put this report out. It's the third one. Nobody's going to report on it. Nobody's going to pay attention to it. What do we have to do? What are your hopes when you go to sleep at night and you get down on your knees? And I know you do. You pray. And you say, Lord, please open the American people's eyes or motivate them to what?
Well, the truth cuts through, and you're speaking out. I'm doing my best to speak out. More and more people are beginning to speak out, and I think it is resonating with the American people. The lawlessness and the abuse of power. You look, for example, at the IRS targeting of conservative groups. Last week, Eric Holder testified in front of the Judiciary Committee. And I took the opportunity to question this administration's lawlessness. 8 months ago, both Eric Holder and President Obama said they were angry and outraged that the IRS had wrongfully targeted conservatives and Obama's political enemies. In the 8 months that have followed, nobody's been indicted. Lois Lerner, the head of the group doing this, has pleaded the Fifth
President said yesterday with Bill O'Reilly or on Super Bowl Sunday that there's not one iota of corruption there. That it was just
not a smidgen.
It was knucklehead moves.
Mm-hmm.
But here's the most staggering thing. We've now learned that the lawyer in charge of the investigation at the Department of Justice is a partisan Obama donor, a major donor who's given over $6,000 to President Obama and the Democrats. And so I asked Eric Holder, I said, listen, attorneys general in both parties have had the courage to stand up to the presidents who appointed them and appoint special prosecutors. Elliot Richardson stood up to President Nixon, appointed Archibald Cox. And Janet Reno stood up to Bill Clinton and appointed Robert Fisk, and both Democrats and Republicans. And I asked Eric Holder, will you demonstrate the same independence, the same integrity your predecessors have?
No.
And he just boldly, his view is the same. Look, when President Obama goes on Bill O'Reilly and says there's not a smidgen of corruption, and I know because I appointed an Obama donor to lead the investigation and make sure nothing was uncovered. I mean, that's just laughing at the Americans.
So, well, I think they do that a lot. Senator, could I ask if your office or somebody could make a list? You just, I think, made one of the best cases against this lawlessness and this unchecked power. Could you just have somebody in your office make a list for the Democrats if you get a Republican in, and they're a progressive Republican, somebody that believes in using all of this government. This is what he can do because of the precedents that has been set right now by our president. Not changing anything else, just using the same levers of power. These are the things that he can do, and you're going to need to sit down and take it. So, I mean, because I think that's the case that needs to be made. It is bad no matter which side has this power.
And if the media were doing their job,
they would do this.
They would be screaming. Look, as I asked Eric Holder, would you trust John Mitchell to investigate Richard Nixon? I mean, if this were Richard Nixon and not Barack Obama, it'd be front page of every newspaper every single day. And instead, the media whitewashes it and ignores it. Now let me say one thing for your listeners, which is that I want to encourage folks to go to a website that we have that is makedclisten.org, makedclisten.org. And it's an opportunity for people to go and talk about which abuse of power, which challenge facing the country you think is the highest priority, whether it's standing up to the IRS abuse of power, whether it's appointing a joint select committee to investigate Benghazi, whether it is repealing Obamacare, whether it is protecting our privacy. And what we're trying to do, you ask what can we do about it? The answer is not going to come from Washington. It's going to come from empowering the American people. And so I devote the majority of my time to trying to take the case to the American people, to energize the American people. So I would urge folks, go to makedclisten.org, makedclisten.org, and tell your story. You can upload your story about how Obamacare is impacting you and speak out. That's the only way we'll turn it back, is if the American people speak out and demand accountability
Senator,
from elected officials